So I would like to talk briefly about some community and outreach activities that are going on in the psychology department. And that's because doing a PhD or being a scientist is not just about research. And I think that's easy to forget, but it's something I very strongly believe in. Very often there's this immense focus on just doing well on research as a PhD student, but of course you also want to be active in your community and reach out to other groups, and diversity and inclusion, it gives you many opportunities to do that. Here are a couple of others sort of that are part of our community. So one is this series called Growing Up in Science. You might have heard of it. This is something that I started like 7 years ago. It is pretty much to hear scientists' life stories, especially with a focus on everything that went wrong. So in a traditional format, a scientist would be speaking about their career with an emphasis on struggles and failures and detours and doubts. And it's eye-opening. Right? Very often people that you really look up to, and they say, oh, they are very, very special, and I would never be able to be like them. They have also had their difficulties, or they're still experiencing difficulties, and you might not have heard about them. And it can be very humanizing and encouraging to hear that we're all human. And even like top scientists, they have their own struggles, and their struggles are often very recognizable. So this concept was explained in this one-page science paper in 2017, in case you want to look it up. Before the pandemic, we would get together with lots of people in a room to just listen to one person's story. Of course, in the pandemic, we do all of this online, so you can also look at the website for upcoming events and join those yourselves already, and keep listening in, regardless of whether you apply to NYU or not. We also have themed events, for example, on mentorship or on anti-racism. And some of our events are recorded, so you can watch them back on the Growing Up in Science YouTube channel. Um, Second category is outreach. So there's lots of us in psychology and in neuroscience who want to explain what we know about the brain to other people, and in particular children and non-experts. Right? So there are two groups there that are very active in that. They're both called neuroscience outreach groups, but psychology is really part of neuroscience, and is considered part of neuroscience for that purpose. So one is called Nogon, N-O-G-N, and the other one is called Combi Brainy or Brainy, which is the New York City chapter of the Society for Neuroscience. And pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, we are like going to schools to talk about the brain and talk about visual illusions and uh, all kinds of fun stuff that draws people into this magical world that we all know so well. If you're interested, you can already ask for more information by emailing Ethan McCurdy. Third thing is, if you're interested in writing, many of us are interested in doing popular writing, so writing for general audiences about the brain. So there's this group called Neuroscience. It actually exists at many universities, and it brings together scientists and journalists and writers to um, like develop pieces for general audiences. So it very often happens that a PhD student in psychology or in neuroscience writes about a brain-related topic in the Atlantic or Slate or the New York Times, and then it gets picked up by a much wider audience, and sometimes it gets read by members of Congress, for example. There are some examples of that. So that's a way to have an effect beyond your immediate research. Also, in that category, I'm involved in this group called the Scientist Action and Advocacy Network, which is essentially a group of scientists, mostly at NYU, but really at many other places too, that is trying to use what we know about science to help um, affect social and environmental change. So, for example, this is a fact sheet that we did on um, how it would be a good idea to raise the age of criminal responsibility, which at the time was 16 years old in New York State, and there was a bill proposed to raise it to 18 years old. Right? And of course, that there are lots of moral arguments to do that, but there's also a lot of scientific arguments to do that, right? Like if you're a 16-year-old, your brain is just not functioning in the same way as when you're an adult, right? And we know this from extensive developmental science. But if you're a lawmaker, or if you're a nonprofit person who's trying to advocate for this change, you might not know that. So we get in touch with a nonprofit organization that's fighting for a social cause, and we provide them with sort of the scientific research. So we make fact sheets for them, knowledge briefs, they're called. We also help correct misunderstandings, for example, like lies or just inaccuracies in the media. So we do fact checking and debunking for our nonprofit partners. And then some of these fact sheets, they become quite prominent in sort of a campaign to pass certain legislation. So eventually, for example, this bill got passed. So the age of criminal responsibility is now 18 years old in New York State. We've also worked against solitary confinement, against the ability for juveniles to waive their Miranda rights, all in the same vein of juveniles should not be treated the same way as adults. We occasionally even get to testify in press conferences, or we hold debates on these topics, all to sort of use science to further policy goals. I want to highlight two postdocs in our department, in the Department of Psychology, who've really taken this a step further. So they've made really engaging fact sheets for defense lawyers and judges and prosecutors, and they've given lectures to those groups. So they would go to a conference of judges and explain to the judges who have no idea about science that teens are not small adults, and they're more susceptible to peer pressure, and their brain develops are still very much in development, and trauma has a disproportionate effect on them, etc. And hopefully it's at least a very direct line to these decision makers, and hopefully it's actually going to change their decision making. If you're interested in this group, then our meetings are every other Thursday, 4 to 5:30. You're welcome to join regardless of whether you apply to NYU or not, regardless of where you are. If you're more interested, you can go to our website or send an email. That's it.
Thank you so much. Any questions about these things, these programs or opportunities that came up? Yeah, Rachel Kushner, feel free.
I'm wondering if the Science Action and Advocacy Network has had any impacts on like the educational sector, because that's really interesting to me.
Yes. So far we have not worked in that sector, but I can easily envision that happening. And we just get project ideas from our members. So if you were to join this group and you were interested in pursuing that, you just suggest it, you find other people who are interested in it, and you lead the project. That's how we work. It's very horizontal.
Taylor.
I was wondering if the race and racism workshop is available to people outside of the NYU program.
Right now, the recordings are only NYU. We're still thinking about making them more public. Right now, the website, which I will post in the chat if it hasn't been already posted, does have a lot of other resources that you can check out. But the recordings of the lectures themselves are right now NYU only. Sorry.